We are recording.
Yes, what are we doing today?
We talk about you.
We're talking about me.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that much I have some idea about.
Okay, that's great. So I am super tired. So I'm moving house. I
You
slept
had
3 hours.
3 hours sleep. That's
Yeah.
not ideal, huh?
So the paper to the rescue.
Paper to the
I
rescue.
will follow the questions and don't wander off too far.
Let's see how that goes.
Don't think I will be
Why do you
able
want to
to.
know about me?
Well, you don't talk much about yourself, and I think it's interesting. Definitely, it's not going to be digging too much to your personal life. It was more in relationship to perspective for life, but it is because you don't come from a very traditional, start where you are right now, and perspective for life, what it is.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
fair.
the road is a bit different, so that's why it's so interesting. It's not. This is almost. It organically grew.
Yeah, very much.
This was not something you intended from the very start, but it formed through the practice. So yeah,
Okay,
there's
well,
an
I'm
interesting
happy to do
story to
that.
tell.
I guess, yeah, I take for granted at times that people who I work with are people who've either known me or people who know me via somebody else. So I guess if anybody's sort of watching this, this is not necessarily a platform that people would ordinarily
It
know me. So
makes
yeah,
sense when they know you,
yeah, I think that's
uh,
fair.
but if they look at what you studied and how day to day kind of title that you carry,
Yeah,
it's not easy translation. So because it just doesn't follow the traditional path.
I think that's a fair. So let's dig in. What do you,
Let's dig in. Right. So if someone asked you to introduce yourself, can you give us a little overview of how would you introduce yourself? If you are now on a really famous podcast, it's like, let's give a bit of a background about you. So can you
okay,
give?
well, I guess I'd go pretty traditionally to start and say, well, I'm married to Bronwyn, and I've been married for 24 years, and I have three beautiful daughters, Donna, Hannah, and Kelsey. And then I'd probably say, well, I've been living in Dubai for about, well, it's not about, it's 19 years now. And I practice complementary and alternative medicine that has become, that has changed quite a lot over the
Is that about
years.
quotation marks with the
I
like
say
air
complementary and
air?
alternative medicine because I still practice, obviously, still within that scope of practice, but the things that I do and the kinds of people that I'm seeing a little differently to possibly what I would have when I first started out in practice. Then I would probably say, in fact, I saw a patient this morning in terms of a lot of what I'm actually doing right now. And it came to me that probably the two things that I do right now for a lot of people is help them understand thinking. So I explain thinking, and then I try and guide their thinking to a place that gives them a better understanding of themselves, a better understanding of others, a better understanding or interpretation of their situations, for the purpose really of being able to make better decisions, to develop the kind of self control necessary to follow through with those decisions consistently enough to bring about meaningful change and improvement in their lives, in the lives of the people that they live with, and really with the intention of trying to bring about more stable, more productive, more useful, more caring, more meaningful, more satisfying kinds of lives. So even though I practice complementary and alternative medicine from a holistic perspective, factoring in thinking and eating and moving and rest and recovery and supplementation and complementary medicine, homeopathic medicine, herbal medicine, those kinds of things, my shift, if I was, presenting what I do now, it's much more along the lines of coming alongside people and helping them to understand themselves and hopefully to live life better.
So you still do support of body in terms of health,
Very much, yeah.
and I think that's interesting because if you look at it traditionally, psychologists or psychotherapists or coaching, they don't study the physiology, they don't
Right.
study the health, and that connection is being lost. And what I love about what you do is that is always connected. So the health of the body is connected to the health of the mind, and the health of the mind actually influences the health of the body, obviously. So that is always addressed. The question is where you start and where the person struggles the most, but it's always supported across all of these forces that actually adds to the health.
I think if we're looking at how I would approach people now, in many respects, it's trying to for me to try and understand what is going to be the most meaningful support for them. So there are times when I might sit with somebody who is physically, generally in good health. They're exercising well, they might be eating well, they might be in a good relationship, they might be with all these things, but they're bearing a tremendous amount of load mentally, stresses of work and that sort of thing. So with that kind of person, my focus is very, very much on the perspective side of things, helping them understand themselves and their thinking and how to navigate the pressures and that of life. But I'm not really paying a lot of attention to the things that they're already taking care of. And I have people who I see, patients who I see like that. And there are other times when I see people, usually the people I'm seeing for the first time, who've been struggling either for, many months or many years. Inevitably they come in, and the pressures that they've been experiencing sort of mentally, emotionally, relationally have impacted negatively on their health and well-being, to the point where, again, they're not sleeping well, they feel fatigued, they're not eating well, they're not really doing any exercise, they don't supplement or do any of those kinds of things. So those people, what I would do before is, if they were coming to me for something that was specifically related to mental, emotional, that side, I would want to dive right in there. But again, I realized pretty quickly that unless the people are actually, supporting their own function, as you said a little bit earlier, even those kinds of recommendations in terms of how to process things don't find the kind of traction that they would otherwise if there is attention given to how it is that we can improve their everyday function. So I'm now at the point where I would say we can give meaningful support and how to process things. But if the health side is not there, then I strongly want to recommend that as well, to the point where I might say to a person, we actually need to recharge and refuel before we redirect. That's the kind of thing that I would be looking at. So practice is still very, very different now. I mean, I still see a number of everyday sort of family related health issues, but certainly the bulk of what I'm doing now relates more to this concept of perspective for life.
Okay, let's stick to the questions. So this is actually what I wanted to know. Was there any pivotal experience before Perspective of Life that you start kind of made you to think about change and getting more involved with discussing mindset and perspective, and or is it just a kind of accumulation of just having this and stepping as like it's not enough? What I do is
I
not
think
enough. It
it's
needs to be
both.
complemented by.
The original change came from when I moved to Dubai. I was working in a clinic, and I was sort of confronted with a lot of lifestyle related problems that were ultimately ending up in obesity and ending up in diabetes. And the more I thought about the kind of patient who I was seeing, the more I was thinking, how do I try and address, sort of one thing that impacts positively on many other health issues, whether they be preventive or sort of management or curative of things that people be struggling with. So, for example, I started developing a concept around about the time when you and I had met, was time for change. And the idea was, if I can get people to, you know, think better, eat better, move better, sleep better, supplement better, the probability is they're going to function better and their health and their well-being would improve. And I still believe that that's true. But what I started realizing was, it was around about the time when there were lots of people starting to come out with, follow this diet and follow this exercise plan, or, use these kinds of supplements. What I think was clear to me at that point was, what was missing was self-control. Again, people, in fact, yeah, I may have said it before in some of our conversations, but I would even at times take a pen and paper and say to a person, you've come to see me for weight loss. Here's or here's a pen and paper, write down what you think would be a good weight loss plan, not for you, but for somebody like you. And inevitably, in 5 minutes, they'd say, well, I tell them to eat less, and I tell them to eat more healthily, and I tell them to exercise regularly and get enough sleep, and all the typical kinds of things that we would ordinarily do. They might even throw in well, I'd put them on a high protein program, or I'd put them on a low GI or a low glycemic load kind of program, or all of these kinds of things that they were familiar with. And what I would do then is show them that you're really not coming to me necessarily for more information. What you're coming to me for is the area that you're really struggling is the translation of what you know into action consistently enough to
To
bring
this.
about the changes that you're looking for, which made me think, why are people struggling with self control? Why are we given to such impulsive behavior? And people know better. I know better. They know better. We knew better, but that wasn't translating into a different kind of life. And I started thinking, and the more I was looking at it, the more I was thinking, it's in the moment we do whatever we want most. In the moment we seem to give in to whatever is most appealing. And I was thinking about that more and more and more. And eventually I was at this point where it almost seems like we've got this conflict in our thinking between, I call it the satisfaction paradox back then. We've got this idea that I want something satisfying down the line, but in order to get that, I have to do something dissatisfying now. Or if I want something satisfying now, inevitably it's going to produce something dissatisfying down the line. Now I'm torn between the two. And that was in about 2007. And I started saying, well, it looks like we've got two different functional characters in the brain. And I started referring to the one as my instant satisfaction seeker,
Yes.
miss. And the other one is it had a more of a future and ultimate value type of approach. So I started saying my future ultimate satisfaction seeker. And I started describing this to people. I would take them through the Time for Change program. I would spend time, an hour saying, let me explain to you what's happening in the thinking so that you can be better positioned to exercise self-control. And then I would spend an hour saying, let me tell you about nutrition so that you can make better decisions. And let me tell you about exercise. And literally would do what we call the training in transformation program. Lots of people were doing like a 6-week transformation plan or an 8-week transformation plan or a 30-day transformation plan. And I said, no, I want to train people in the art of transformation. And then they can go ahead and decide what they want to do and what sort of transformation they were looking at. And again, what I realized more and more was the mindset was everything. At that point in time, everything came down to the thinking part. It wasn't that there was, again, the lack of information. Then I attended an obesity conference. It was in Phoenix. And I was sitting listening to somebody who was talking about addiction, addictive behavior. And he said that they had been doing some functional MRI studies. And what they found was there were almost these two competing neural circuits. And they had my attention. Two competing neural circuits. Wow, what is that? And then he was saying, when people are given the opportunity for something instantly satisfying, this part of the brain seems to light up. And when there was the need to exercise self-control, another part of the brain sort of was starting to light up. And the more I sat there, the more I could see that this guy with so much more experience than me, so much, more research than me, was pointing to what I had observed in practice over and over and over again. And that started really my attention towards, let me try and understand thinking and mind and brain more than I'd ever understood it. And that really led, I think, to the significant change. So the application was still strongly in diet and lifestyle and weight loss. And we were doing really well at that time because I think what we were offering was really that bridge between a plan and how
Exactly.
to translate to action to bring about the results. And then I would come up with things like, you are what you do. So I had, the equation of change being designed at that stage and the three immutable laws of health and well-being and all of those things. But I was becoming more and more fascinated with thinking. And I guess being in the privileged position that I was to deal with patients every day, and the clinic that I was working with, really, they were so good to me in that they allowed me time to think and to structure and to plan. And that really laid the foundation for what I think is Perspective for Life today.
Wow. Um, okay. So one thing I want to ask you is that mind map
Mm,
has so many versions.
mm.
Where you know?
Since I started counting, I'm on version 25.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when was the first mind map kind of when was that perspective life stick man born? Really, that I mean, know it so well. You doodle all the time. I mean, this is something about you. You doodle all the time. You're super visual, and it's amazing how every conversation we have, you take the immediately
Pen
piece
and
of paper.
paper.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like piece of paper and the pen, and then the you just lay it out. It flows out to you so naturally. But the stickman is always there. It's like there's a little guy and the representation of us and all the personal. But when was the first mind map
So when I started,
born?
and as I was saying, it was about 2007, 2008, I was starting to draw sort of a brain with two parts. And that I would always scribble. And I would then, as I was working with it more and more, and as I was learning more and more, so that diagram became more and more to the point where it was actually quite a number of years. I was at a different clinic in 2016, and I would literally sit down with each person before we even got started and say to you, let me explain a few things before we get going. And I got so tired of drawing the same thing that I actually thought, you know what, I actually need to sit down at some point and have at least a template that's going to save me 15 or 20 minutes of time,
Roadmap.
and then I can build on it from there. So I think it was about 2016 that I had the first semi-official mind map that I was still actually.
So mind map summarizes the concepts that you go through, and that's actually underlying. It's a foundation for perspective for life. That's
It's the core, absolutely, or now of pretty much everything that I do. It basically is on a single piece of paper. You've seen it, and you've seen it being revised. Where it is right now is when I make a tweak now, it's, I might change a word just because I think it might flow a little better in conversation. Instead of me saying something like dissonance, I might say contradiction, or, sort of
so,
incongruence, I might say, something, use a slightly different word. But
it's a living tool,
it is. I
constantly
mean,
evolving.
I had 4 patients that I was sitting with before we sat down now. And I think I had commented to you and to John that it was just one of those mornings where every single person that I saw, I mean, they are struggling with all the toughest things in life in terms of what we're dealing with. And for every single one of them, I've got now an A3 version of the mind map. For every single one of them, as a part of the discussion, the explanation and the circling and the connecting and the showing and the explaining, and virtually every one of them have an aha moment, which is really what I aim to try and give people is insight into themselves so that they can then sit and then piece things together because they know where they want to go. I can't tell them where they should want to be, but the mind map now, which is really really structured in a way to give insight into what motivates us, what perspective is, how perspective works, what reality is, what limitations we have, those two competing neural circuits, the 5 areas that we find satisfaction in, the 6 things that typically make us unhappy, the 3 natural responses that we have to trying to restore satisfaction, how that reverses sometimes preventively, how easy it is for us to get stuck, the 5 basic steps to every solution, how time is factored in, how self-concept is factored in, how health and well-being are factored in. All of these things they come together on that single page that it really doesn't matter what we discuss now. It's it's basically all there as a framework so that people can see it. And as I say at the end, make sense of. That's the whole point. It is a map, it is a guide to making sense of self and other people for, as I said before, the purpose of developing a greater understanding, which is what I believe is at the heart of any meaningful change. It's we can tell people, do this, that, and the other. And if they do it, they'll often benefit. But I've found when people understand themselves and why they struggle with certain things and how speaking to a person slightly differently because of how it may be interpreted or because of all of a sudden, I used the word traction earlier. The kind of traction that we get for change, it's just better than anything else that I've been able to do you know, prior to that in now 25 years of practice.
Is that what most people actually comment on when you look when you hear people actually explaining the value of mind map and explaining the value post, being, having consultation with you? What do you usually hear? I mean, I'm curious myself.
Right. I've heard things like, why are they not teaching this in schools?
Okay.
I've heard, can you teach this to my kids? My teenager really needs to hear that. Or, my husband could really do with hearing that. Or so oftentimes people are looking at it and saying, I see the value in somebody else I know. If they had a better understanding of this, things would be better for them. I've had people say things like, if I had known this 10 years ago, my life would be completely different. So I think people, oftentimes I say, is this yours? Did you come up with this? And, I say to them, well, it's years and years of piecing together. I mean, you've known me well enough and long enough to say that I won't say it's a weakness, but certainly I don't spend a tremendous amount of time studying anybody else's work. Really what I've got in the mind map is something that I have compiled and built on through thousands and thousands and thousands of consultations with people. With, frankly, when I did study, I mean, when I was still studying um, homeopathy to begin with, I did, full dissection, human anatomy, human physiology, a good understanding of what was happening in the brain. So these were things that were part of my background. The understanding of uh, again, anatomy, physiology, pathology, all of those things. Those things were always there. So they provided a tremendous foundation for me to then start building on. And obviously, within my own sort of um, thinking and that sort of thing, I've had certain things become a little bit more clear. As I mentioned, I might have been sitting in a conference and I'll be like, oh, wow, that's really interesting. So there are times when I'll pick up on something that possibly somebody else has said or I've come across, and it's like, oh, that's probably a better way to describe what I've observed. So I think it's fair. And actually, I'm grateful to you for even initiating this because, again, it's not intuitive for anybody who's going to meet me. But the people who would know me would tease at times and say, oh, it's the mentalist again, or a this or a that. And, I'm grateful for, as I say, the opportunity I've had to develop what I believe is meaningful and can stand up to scrutiny. I think that's important for me to say. When I was first doing the mind map and using it, I would always say to people, please find fault. Show me where it doesn't work. You know, unpick it for me, tear it apart for me, because I make the statement everything that we would need to know, sort of principally, on how we think, feel, live, learn, and grow on one page. I'm the first one to say, well, that's a rather bold statement. Yeah, absolutely. And I hold to it now. And again, I can say it's been open to so many people, sort of teasing apart, trying to tear apart. But I think what makes it as valuable as what it is today is it's comprehensive and it's coherent. In other words, it doesn't matter which piece you're working with, it fits beautifully together. It's seamless almost in the way in which that it functions. It's not like, oh, there's a piece here that works very nicely in that block, but it contradicts this section. There's no contradiction. And I think that is something that really makes it as useful as what it is.
So, what kind of change do you see? What does the person do better, or what kind of behavioral change do people experience once they truly grasp mind map? Once they truly go with the concepts? When they truly say, "Okay, I'll apply what I just understood." Then, so what do they become?
Greater self awareness is inevitable. What I find is oftentimes they have a legitimate distrust of themselves. In other words, they're less inclined to defend their feelings and more inclined to be willing to look to see, is my perspective on this reasonable? So I think it grows empathy in people. Certainly, there is greater patience with the people they are with. Oftentimes, I will have people who I've been working with who I don't know necessarily the spouse or somebody along those lines. And I might not have seen a person for a couple of months and they'll come back and say, I think it's time for you to go and see Ryan. I think it's time for a sort of just a polishing or that sort of thing. So the change is evident to the people around them. That is something that has become very, very clear. As I would then maybe meet those people, the spouse or whatever down the line, and they'd say to me, "Oh, I can see when he's been to you, or I can tell when she's come to visit," because really what it is, it's a refresher. And the reality is life is busy, and oftentimes we forget some of these things, not because, we've forgotten them, never to remember them again, but they're not at the forefront of our minds. So I find that when people are able to have the aha moment to begin with, and then they're able to apply these things, the change is significant. Sometimes people will say it's night and day. And then inevitably we drift towards old habits and old patterns. And then they're like, oh, I need a refresher. And then we, sort of run through the things again. And what I find is each time that happens, I'll use the word for the third time, there's further traction. So it's almost like the more people get to use it, the more they become exposed to it, actually, the better and better they get to make it their own. Inevitably, people will say, can I take a photograph of that? Or can I have a copy of that? I mean, this morning, somebody who I've worked with for quite a long time said, oh, I need to take a photograph of those 5 categories of satisfaction. So the changes that I see are inevitably ones that are massively favorable to their relationships, to their care, and frankly, their patience and understanding of themselves. Um, yeah, I guess it gives people a greater sense of who they are and who other people are, and what makes for better interaction and what makes for better decision making.
So they make better priorities, I'm guessing, in life as well. Better thinkers, decision making, I'm
Absolutely. All
guessing.
of those things seem to be, what really is a common sort of effect of its use.
Some I'm and for sure this influenced you to change as well, this level of introspection and thinking about who we are as people. And obviously you reflected this on yourself. How has perspective for life and mind map changed you?
I think it's had a massive influence on me. I think it's provided a structure for me. I mean, I can't say that there's anything massively new that I've sort of learned, say, over the last 10 years. There's been a continual process of refining. And what I've found is the mind map, which is always at the forefront of my mind. If I'm looking at somebody, I almost see them now through that lens. And when I look at myself, I see myself through that lens. So what it's allowed me to do is if I am feeling something, if I'm having an emotion, I'm able to now within myself quickly identify, where is this coming from? What is it that might be upsetting me? What is it that might be exciting me? What is a good course of action here? So the mind map has provided structure for me in how I deal with myself, how I deal with other people. So um, I live it. I'll say it like that. I would say to you that I live the mind map.
Or there's a life that comes with it. It's interesting. I think you have this peace of mind. I think there's a calmness to it. It's amazing how your demeanor is always the same. You come and you quite often, your energy is always at the same level. You never have fluctuations. I can say that for sure. I know you long enough. But I'm going to add something for myself. I came with far more luggage than you into mind map. It is interesting how you can predict where body will take you in a certain when you are exposed. So obviously I'm sleep deprived. I was just watching
Doing a
myself and
great job, by the way. Thank you for that.
okay. So, but I was looking at myself and thinking, obviously at this, when the body is under such a stress, so overreaction, probably I'm gonna just be more emotional. The body will. So I actually said, well, so how do I, clearly just be, observe that, be aware, monitor, and then be prepared to act on it. So it's always that third eye. But what I love that I gave me is these questions, and these are natural pauses. What's the best thing to do now? So kind of predicting what comes to us, what the body will. It's just the weakness. It's just what we are as a people. I wouldn't say weakness. It's just more. It's almost like a knee jerk reaction in certain situations that we act on. And I just keep more watchful eye. simply because my reactions and choices will influence others, so, and obviously choices I make will produce certain consequences. I just, so it's amazing that cost is always in front of me now, like, oh, well,
Mm.
so what's your choice? So you have this internal conversation now
Yeah.
acts because of the practice. It happens so quick. It's amazing. It's how fast you go through. What am I doing? What am I feeling? What should be the best course of action right now? What is right now happening? So this scanning of the environment, scanning of self is so fast. And then it's like, what's the best choice? Can I communicate? What are my limits? What are my priorities? And all of these questions accumulated over time,
Mm.
and you literally go through it's like almost like a pilot, a checklist.
Sure.
Are we ready for the flight? It's amazing. And I know you do this super fast as well.
Well, again, I'm delighted. I mean, you and I have, again, we've worked together a long time. So you've seen this as I'm looking at it right
Yeah,
now.
yeah. Which
You've
version is
seen
in?
it, right? This is, I think, version 24, right? But one thing you said here, and it's written just in one section: satisfaction, tendencies, and predictability. I think one of the things that I possibly haven't touched on that is tremendously helpful is, again, whenever I sit with somebody, I say, I'm not your judge, and I'm not going to tell you what to do. But one of the things that I've realized is that when a person says to me, I think I'm going to do this, I can say to them, fine, but I'm going to show you what is likely to be the outcome of that, the outcome for you, the outcome for the other person, etc. Because as complex as life can be, the principles, they're usually not that complicated. It's oftentimes, the little details that come in that seemingly create tremendous complexity. But there is tremendous predictability within people. I used to say when I first started with the mind map, if I know what you want and I know what you have, in many respects, I'll predict exactly how you'll deal with given situations, because everybody's motivated in pursuit and preservation of maximal satisfaction, and they're going to do that on the basis of the resources they have. So I would say predictability was key. In fact, I mean, I'll say it lightly now, and I showed it to you in a message. Somebody messaged me earlier today saying, you know, I'm sure your wife loves the fact that you're always 100% right, which is obviously a massive exaggeration. But the idea is, no, it's not that I'm right per se, but things are so predictable. Yes, there are certain things that one could say the detail I wasn't expecting at this time or that. But even when you step back, the overarching things in life, there is predictability, great predictability, which is tremendously helpful in trying to navigate the uncertainty of the future. So one of the things I find the mind map is tremendously helpful for now is exactly what you're saying you're doing internally. Is I can check myself. I can ask myself. I
Yeah.
can almost have this internal dialogue that's now guided by a good understanding of how things work, rather than something somewhat random, trying to tell myself something or convince myself of something. I can literally quickly engage, as I know that you can now as well. You can engage with yourself through the framework of what's there and arrive very quickly at, this is important. This is insignificant. This is something that I need to act on now. This is something that I can delay. And so again, I think it increases efficiency and efficacy, which both of are tremendously
If I can
helpful.
add, I mean, at least for me, it added a great sense of control of self,
Mm.
and with that, I could handle life way better. Because reality, I'm really, it is what it is, and But what I really wanted is to have to be reliable to myself and to have a really good control of self. So when I meet the environment as it is, I really show up at the best version of self. At least I know what's my best version. To be honest, I'm very clear who I want to be. I'm very clear how I want to show up in the world, and I keep working on it. For that, you need to be, assessing yourself. So, but I think with that, you are more open to challenge yourself. You're more open to expose yourself to things. You don't hide from the world. It's amazing how you just don't worry. I mean, you just don't have you can handle things.
I
Yeah.
think that that's entirely true. In fact, I said to somebody, as I said to you, I mean, the 4 people that I had seen this morning, these were big deals. I mean, we're talking about death, we're talking
Yes.
about separation, we're talking about big, big
Yeah, true
things.
traumas in life.
And
Yeah.
the person asked me, they said to me, who do you speak to? They said, who do you have to go ahead and help you with
Yes.
these things? And it is a question that sometimes people ask me. And my response was, well, I speak a lot to myself, right? Which is along the lines of what we're talking about now. But I'm thankful to be able to have my wife. I'm thankful for my children. My oldest is 18, and the kinds of conversations I can have with her, relate to a lot of these things. I have my brother who's with me all the time, these are people who are close to me and who I trust. I've got John, who I work with. You and I have these kinds of conversations. And then, as I said, and I have my faith. I have as a point of reference to me what I believe life is all about, is what I find in the Bible. So a lot of the things that you've described right now, in terms of just, I face the uncertainty of the future with its possibilities and probabilities with very, very much without a sense of anxiety. Not to say that I anticipate everything is going to go smoothly or be comfortable. I'm mindful of the fact that that isn't life, but I am confident in the fact that even in those difficulties, there are ways and means of processing the realities and the challenges of life to deal with them in ways that are good, which is why, in essence, I think Perspective for Life now has that summary 3-word statement: live now well. And that's something we'll unpack at length at some point. But I find that the mind map has been integral in many respects in enabling me to try and live that and encourage and show other people how to do the same.
It's amazing how much energy you preserve
Oh,
when you tackle life like this. And that's the first thing. You just don't attach yourself to the wrong problems. You don't exaggerate your emotions. You just, it's so clear what is worth of your attention, and definitely investment, especially if it's emotional. And emotional is costly. So you really, you just feel that you scale life way better in terms of where should you kind of stay longer and think longer, and where decisions should be really fast and you should just move on, and definitely don't attach kind of drama to it as well. So, but let's go back to the questions.
maybe we should do that as a part 2.
Oh,
Let's do that as a part 2. I don't know how long we've been going. Probably
I
longer
have
than.
no idea.
Okay, so we'll
Hold
come
that
back
thought.
to
Is it
Who's Ryan part 2.
like right? Thanks.